Hello everybody. I'm going to be going over some common issues with photos and how to correct them using Affinity Photo. So I have Affinity Photo open. Just a reminder, you can press F4 and then start typing photo to search for the app, or Command space, same thing. When you open Affinity Photo, we have some different lessons, we have some templates, we can see things that were opened recently, we can open new files, and we can work with a preset size as a starting point. I'm going to open some images that I've already downloaded. These are either in the public domain or they're available to be used and modified with the proper license. So I have 4 different images here that I'm going to be working with, and I can either hold down on Shift or Command to make sure that I have them all selected. So I have my 4 images and I'm just going to open. It's going to open each image in its own tab. So I have this postcard that's in the wrong orientation. There's also this parallax behavior where it was taken at an angle instead of straight on, so the angle's distorted. We have some bad acne, we have some red eye from the flash, and then we have some really poor lighting. I'm going to go through and show you how to fix all of these different problems. So let's start with the red eye. This is something that happens when you have a flash. It happened more often on film cameras. I think a lot of today's cameras just automatically correct it when it happens, but if you ever run into it, it's a super easy fix. So we have the toolbar on the side, and whenever you do a long hold on the tools here, you're probably going to see a healing brush the first time. It looks like a little makeup brush with a teal handle. But if you hold down on that, a lot of these tools are for correcting different problems. So red eye removal. I can just click on the eye and it'll remove the red eye. I'm going to undo that. I can also click and drag around the eye to correct it that way. And so it just removes the red eye and fixes the problem really quickly. All I need to do now is save my image and it's been fixed. So I can just close out of there. Next up, we're going to work on fixing the acne. And there are a few things that we can do. Same place where we have the red eye tool, we have a blemish removal tool. So long hold on the red eye tool, which was under the healing brush originally, to access blemish removal. The only thing we can change here is the size, and usually I try to go with something that's a little bit bigger than the area that I'm fixing, but not too big. And so anywhere there's a blemish in the skin, I can just click on that point, and using the information that's around it, it will sort of try to get the best correction that it can. Now sometimes you're going to want to make the brush bigger. Sometimes you're going to want to make it smaller. Sometimes you can sort of see the boundaries of the brush. That might mean that the brush was too small. So I maybe should have tried doing that a little bit bigger. I'm just going to undo that. But maybe I need a different technique for that area. So if there's an area where the blemish removal isn't working at whatever size, you can always go back in the history, any number of steps that you want to. But underneath the blemish removal tool, we have something called the patch tool, and this is one of my favorites when it comes to manipulating images. You just sort of click and drag around the area you want to fix, and then when you move the cursor, you're choosing the part of the picture that you want to replace that information with. So I can experiment with different areas. When I find something that seems like a good fit, I can just double click or click a couple times anyway, and it'll fill in that information. And usually the edges are going to be more subtle. Sometimes I might do this a couple of times. I don't tend to do a really big shift. Again, click a few times to get out of that. If you select too large of an area, there's going to be a really obvious repeat. So I tend to do smaller areas at a time. And so just sort of clicking and dragging around the area that's a problem, and then choosing an area to correct it with, and clicking a couple times to get out of it. Usually it does a pretty great job. There is one last tool that I might use to correct acne or other flaws, or even just to remove something, and that is the clone stamp. So a few more tools up, underneath the burning and dodge tools that we've used previously with the green screen photos. So clone brush, I'm going to change the size here to match up a little bit better with what I'm working with. And I want to choose an area that doesn't have any problems. And I'm going to just press on the Option key and click to sort of select from that area. Now, yours is probably aligned by default, and you'll notice there are actually a bunch of settings we can change, but this allows you to just sort of paint using that area as a starting point. Sometimes having it aligned where the area you're selecting from moves is really helpful. Sometimes it's more helpful to have it unaligned, and so it's just continuing from that one spot. It's really a matter of personal preference. We can see right now it's actually adding more distortion, so I'm probably going to go back a few steps instead. So sometimes it's really helpful, sometimes it's not. Sometimes I'll use a combination of the two tools, the clone stamp and the patch tool, depending on the area that I'm trying to fix. Again, if I'm using the patch tool, I'm usually not using it for a really large area. Now, something fun about the clone stamp is you can use it to correct things, but if I select like from the eye over here, you can also use it just like a stamp to repeat parts. And then I could always come in with maybe the patch tool to blend the edges a little bit more successfully. And maybe she's going to start looking like an AI hallucination, or maybe she's going to start looking like she's an alien, depending on how I want this to go. Now, I just want to do a acne removal, and that should be all set. So I don't have any changes to any layers or anything, so I can just save this with Command S. Now, sometimes it will ask you to save flattened or save as. It depends on what you're doing. If you have layers, you probably want to do save as so that you continue to have access to those layers. If you don't, it's okay to just save flattened, and that overwrites the original copy of the image with the new version. So really easy. Correcting acne, we have a few different ways to do it. That's a common issue in photos that you might need to correct. So I'm just going to close out of that one. Next up, we're going to fix this image with the bad orientation and the bad parallax. So orientation is super easy. Just document menu. I can rotate 90 degrees either clockwise or counterclockwise. In this case, I know the image needs to go counterclockwise. Orientation is fixed. Now for the parallax behavior, we have these 5 different personas across the top over here. We're in the photo persona. We're going to go to the develop persona, the one that looks like a little light bulb with rainbow colors coming out from it. Okay, so I'm over in the develop persona. I'm going to take the crop tool and I'm going to adjust to get closer to the boundaries of the photo. And over on the lens tab, I'm going to play around with these sliders here under lens profile. So I'm going to slide along the horizontal axis. I'm going to slide along the vertical axis. And notice this is starting to look a lot straighter than it did before. So I'm not going to get this absolutely perfect, but I can get it significantly better than the image was originally. You can also play around with the level of distortion depending on what makes sense for that. And it's just a matter of experimenting. As I'm going, I might keep adjusting the crop a little bit to whatever ends up making sense. I might end up cropping this image just a little bit and lose a tiny bit of information along the edges, but this isn't going to be noticeable to anybody else. So something like this probably looks a lot better. So now I can develop. That's probably way more zoomed in than the actual image, so I'm just going to zoom out. And you can see most people are not going to know that I cropped it a little bit. The angle looks like it's straight on. It looks significantly better than it did before. Now from here, if I want to do any other corrections, I certainly can. Like I could use the patch tool to remove the birds, for example, if there's something that I don't want to keep. And really easy thing to start doing other corrections. But otherwise, when I feel like I'm all set, just Command S. Again, I don't have multiple layers. I don't care about the original version of the image. I can save flattened and overwrite the image, and I'm good. I'm just going to close out of that. Last up, we have this picture just with really poor lighting. Now, when you take a photo, the amount of light determines the amount of detail in the photo. And we can't add detail that's missing back into it, but we can certainly improve the display of the detail that does exist there. So there are two ways I can do this: a destructive way that's more permanent and a non-destructive way that I can continue to edit. And it's really a matter of personal preference. I'm going to start with the destructive option over in the Develop Persona. So under the Basic tab, there are a bunch of different settings here, though actually before I go over them, I do want to mention if you can't get into the Develop Persona, it's just because your layer isn't active. So make sure you have this blue highlight here. It'll allow you to go into the Develop Persona. But in the Develop Persona, I can play around with the exposure of the image, the level of the black point, the overall brightness of the image. I can experiment with the image's contrast, clarity, the saturation of the colors, how vibrant those colors are. I can play around with the white balance. I think the white here looks a little bit too warm, so going more towards the cooler colors might be a little bit more accurate. I can always toggle these settings on and off to see how they've changed. Maybe I want them to be more drastic. You can see that temperature shift. Maybe I want it to be a little bit more subtle. I can change the shadows and the highlights. Now, because there was limited information in the original photograph, just because of the poor lighting, the more I start adjusting things, the more noise, the more pixelated this image starts to look. And so under the Details tab, I can do some noise reduction. And the luminance slider is going to have the biggest impact on that. So as I move the slider, it sort of smooths out the noise that's there. It doesn't completely remove it and completely fix it, but it minimizes the problem. So if I go too far to the right, it's going to start to look really filtered, maybe more like an illustration and less like a photo. So I want to be strategic about how far I slide this over. I want it to be just enough over that it's going to be minimizing the issue and not adding to it. Maybe I pushed some of these settings a little bit too far because I definitely still see some more noise in the image, maybe more than I want. So I can always come back and adjust my settings and sort of minimize some of the changes that I made so that I'm still improving the lighting, but maybe adding less distortion to it. Whenever I get to a point where I'm satisfied with the change, it's the best I think that it can be, I can just click on Develop, and it makes that a permanent change, at least unless I undo this before I save. So if I save now, it'll completely overwrite the original version with this version of the image. I'm actually going to go back in history to the original version, and I'm going to show you how to do a lot of those steps, but in a non-destructive way where I can keep making changes to it as I need to. So in the Layers panel, we have a few little menus here. The little circle that's half black, half white across the diagonal opens up all sorts of adjustment layers. So if this was a black and white image, I might go to the levels. You see this waveform that represents the values and then the colors. I can adjust the black level. Usually we want that lining up with the left side of the waveform. The white level, again, usually should be lining up with the end of the waveform. And then I can adjust the overall darks and lights from here. Now, levels is really intended more for black and white images, so I'm just going to delete that. And instead, I'm going to add a curves adjustment layer. You can see there's a similar waveform, but we have this little line here where we can grab on and adjust the values and the overall brightness of the image. So if I drag down, it's going to get darker and less bright. If I drag up, it's going to get brighter and lighter. And I can actually drag onto this curve from different points to make something more complicated. And I can actually get crazy filtered looking. Or it might be that I'm just trying to adjust the values in a specific part of the image. If I end up with a handle that I don't want to keep, I can just press the delete key to remove it. Most of the time, if I'm trying to do accurate lighting, I'm just dragging a little bit up or a little bit down, depending on if the picture is too dark or too light. And so then I can close out, The great thing about the adjustment layers is I can toggle off the visibility so I can see my change. And I can click on the icon to get back into the setting at any time. If I go back into the adjustment layer menu, you'll notice that we have a lot of the same settings. So I can change the exposure of my image. I can adjust the brightness and the contrast. All sorts of things I can change. Color balance is probably going to be one of the most useful ones here. I can change the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights. So this picture is very red, very yellow, it's very warm, and it probably should be cooler. So if I drag the sliders towards the cool colors, it's really going to shift the colors to be cooler. This is going to be a lot more obvious in the shadows just because this is such a dark image. So I can go too far. So I want to be sort of strategic about how far I want to drag each slider over. And then the same thing with the highlights, probably towards all my cooler colors to be a little bit more accurate. And so if I turn the visibility of this on and off, we can see that drastic shift. Again, we still have that noise going on because the more we try to add information where there isn't, the more we're going to have that happening. But it's significantly better in terms of the lighting compared to where I started. Now, you may notice that there's not actually a noise option over here. So I can't fix absolutely everything, but if I have my photo layer selected, I can come back to the develop persona. Then under details, I can do the noise reduction, again, adjusting the luminance slider, whatever I think is the smallest amount to minimize the noise without necessarily making this look less like a photo. Whenever I'm happy with it, I can just develop it and then I'm all set. Now I'm actually looking at this a little bit zoomed in, so let's look at it the actual size. You can see it definitely does still have some noise, but it's added a lot of information back into the image. So the overall quality, if we compare this to the very beginning, is significantly better compared to the original. So again, this isn't something that I can fix completely, but I can make significant improvements to it. Now, in this case, I do have multiple layers, so when I save it, I probably want to save as so that I have a editable version of my file. So now I can come back into this. I can decide, oh, I don't want that curves layer, I'm going to hide it, or I need to adjust my color balance. I can come back and make changes to it. When I want to share it with someone else, I'm going to go over to the export persona. It's going to be a JPEG by default, which is fine. And I just want to click on the little icon right here to actually share this with the location that I need. So I just want to click on the little arrow to the right of the slice here and give it a name, choose my save location, and export. And that will give me a version that I can share with anybody that I want to. But that's really it as far as common photo fixes go.